So this year, we surveyed grantmakers for 164 GFE member organizations, which is an astoundingly large and diverse group of funders, to get a sense of what's happening right now for you in your grant making, what strategies are you using, what issues are you supporting, what challenges are you facing. I'm going to share just one or two top-line findings, and you will all be receiving this wonderful report in the mail in just a couple of weeks. But we wanted to take this moment to talk to you first. First of all, as we did our survey this year, we were really pleased and heartened to find that in education philanthropy, in this room, funding levels are stabilizing. Last year, you'll remember we talked a lot about the way grant-making budgets were being pared far, far back from historic levels because of the economic crisis. And what you see on this chart, the orange bar represents the change in grant-making for grant-makers in 2009. The blue bar shows in 2010. So what you can see is on the left side of this chart, in 2009, a lot of funders were experiencing cuts. Almost 60% had been cutting their budget from the previous year. This year, the vast majority of our funders say that their budgets are remaining the same. So we thought that was really heartening news. We know there's still deep and continued pressure, but we have been stabilizing funding in the field. Now, a very exciting finding for me personally, and a real priority for GFE, is that we are finding that you all are focusing much more on policy. 70% of GFE's members said that they are engaging in grant making around policy change. They're doing that on the local level, the state level, and the national level. This is something that we believe is a critical strategy for leverage, for sustainability, for scale, and you all are doing it too. And they're taking on new roles. 9 years ago, at my first GFE conference, we had a session on policy, and it was considered a very risky topic. In fact, there were quite a few people who didn't want us to use the word policy because they were so frightened by the IRS guidelines and wanted to stay so far afield. The world has changed. If you look at us now, 70% of you are funding in policy. You'll see that you're also doing it in such a wider range of roles. These are some of the ways. So of that 70%, 3/4 of you, yes, are in fact funding policy research, that comfortable spot of education grant making. And by the way, a very important one. I don't in any way want to diminish it. But as we've been reminded by a number of policymakers, including the ever-wise Bob Wise, data alone is not going to carry the day. And you all know that, and you're responding that. If you turn to the next slide, you'll see that an astonishing 72% of those of you funding policy are funding advocacy. I have to say, if there was one finding that made me, sit down and take a hard look at the numbers, that is extraordinary change in this field, and it really represents the ways that many of you are thinking hard about what it really takes to affect policy change. There's one area I think we all are going to need to turn a lot more attention to as funders who work around policy, which is that only 38% of you, of the ones funding policy, are funding implementation. Now, we have had a lot of conversations over the past 3 days about policy, and I have to say, implementation is where the rubber hits the road. We have Common Core state standards. What's going to be different? That's implementation. We've had all kinds of school funding lawsuits. I loved somebody said, every state has its school finance lawsuit and its state bird. How many of those states have equal school funding? It's implementation. This is a real task, and we as a field have to get a lot smarter about what it takes to see that once we get those policies enacted, something different happens on the ground. And if you talk to some of the folks, I was in the session with the grant makers from Tennessee and Delaware talking about the race to the top, early months. There's a lot of sweat equity that they're putting in now. Getting that award was the first step in a very long road. There's a lot of great data in the benchmarking study on which issues you're funding, on where you're funding, and we'll be really excited to share that with you when you get the report. But I wanted to take just a moment to highlight 3 big ideas and challenges that we want to put out there for all of you as a field. First, you need to use our independence well. Take the long view. We have so much freedom and so much luxury as a sector. We sit outside of the day-to-day, the quotidian. We don't have all of the pressures, the strictures, the stakeholders that other systems do, that our nonprofit grantees do, that school systems do, that elected leaders do. We don't have election cycles. We sit outside of all of that. And we should use that really smartly to be looking way down the road at the same time that we're working in the here and now. Another dimension of this is that we have to get a lot more comfortable with risk. I've heard us called the sector of risk capital, and I think, back one, please. We have risk capital, but we're not investing it as risk capital. Risk is really something that we have not embraced by and large as a sector. I think we have to get a lot more comfortable with the idea of failure. We have to get a lot more honest about failure when it happens and dissecting it. And we have to get a lot more willing to put out competing hypotheses and test them instead of getting stuck in the arguments about these competing hypotheses that have really paralyzed education reform today. There's just too many debates about ideology, and we need a lot more examination of what works and a lot more investigation of that and experimentation. And finally, as being an independent sector, we really need to figure out how to be partners with government without losing our independence. It's been an extraordinary thing to see this sector galvanize and rally, working with the federal government, working with your local grantees to helping them leverage federal funds, working to affect state policy. We're engaging and connecting with government in ways we'd never contemplated before. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But there are some really smart critics who also point out its perils. And as we do this, we'll really need to figure out just what does it mean to be a partner, but also to be a critical friend. This is sort of a truism. We need to work together. Sound good? But we need to do it better. You know, we here at GFE, we talk a lot about education philanthropy as a field. All kinds of beautiful flowers scattered all over that field, and they are lovely, important, precious flowers that make a beautiful picture. But too often, it's a very scattered picture. And we need to find ways to work together that go from random collections of scattered flowers to something that is really knitted together and fits together into a harmonious whole. And by the way, a quick note from the Portland Visitors Bureau, that's our Japanese garden. Come see it. It's lovely. We are collaborating more than ever. 90% of respondents in the benchmarking survey said that they are collaborating with other funders. And by the way, collaboration needs to happen on a lot of fronts. We talked about collaboration with government, collaboration with grantees and communities. All of these are important, but we're focusing right now on funder collaboration. But we have to get a lot better at it, and we have to get a lot clearer about what it means and how we do it. There was a terrific quote from one of the respondents that I wanted to share. Unless we use our networks effectively, funders risk creating thousands of theories of change and isolated programs that don't have the net impact we seek. Pulling together more in defining priorities, policies, and best practices is critical for making real headway on the deep-rooted problems in education. Couldn't have said it better myself. The last idea I want to challenge all of us to do, and I am constantly struggling with this, is that we must learn to embrace complexity. We need a much, much more nuanced picture of how schools change and what we should be doing to help schools improve. There is also a need to have a much more complete picture of how children grow and develop and learn and how they progress along the pathway of their education. We have a tendency to fall into our silos and to pick this one spot we're going to work and we're going to do it really well, and we lose sight of the fact that that finish line is actually a lot farther away, and that the kids that come through so magically at the spot where we touch them, if we're doing well, are not making it to that finish line. In short, we need to know that there are no silver bullets. We need to respect the complexity of the issues that really are confronting students and the improvement of our education systems. We need to seek multifaceted solutions. We need to align systems. And by the way, one of the things you'll see in the data is that we're doing that more than ever, that a lot of you indicated that you are supporting efforts to create greater alignment between early learning and K-12, between high school and college, in school and out of school time. You see it, you're doing it, and it's another place where we really want to sharpen and deepen our practice. I want to recognize, in talking about embracing complexity, we're presenting you with a very tough challenge. GFE continues to hold up and really live by our 8 principles for effective grant making. One of those principles is focus, and I think it's a very important principle. You can't get anything done if you're doing a little bit here and a little bit there. But on the other hand, I think that the other side of the coin of focus is silos and compartmentalization. And so I think the challenge for all of us in practice is, how do you pick where you want to work, whether it's the issue, the geography, your strategy, but do it in a way that you're in active dialogue with the context around that work. If you're working at a particular age range, you need to understand what's happening with the students as they come to you, and you need to care about where they're going next. You need to think about the others who are working in that space and how your work intersects. And lastly, in embracing complexity, we need to recognize that this work takes time, and you need to be in it for the long haul. In the immortal words of quite a few of the candidates who are running for office this season, we need to man up and get real. I'm sorry, that was an ironic reference, by the way. And get real in recognizing that change really does take time, and one of the most important things that we can do as grant makers is persist in our efforts and not walk away when we don't see the results we want after 2 or 3 years. So that's just a couple of top-line thoughts. There's much more for you to chew on there. But mostly, I want to recognize and acknowledge all of you for just the extraordinary conversations over the past 3 days, the deep engagement you bring, and I have to say a real indicator, the relatively few blackberries that were plaguing conference sessions. So thanks for your attention and time, and for being part of GFE.